I deem that it's prejudicial?
Yeah. Then they're allowed to appeal it.
They can't appeal it if they think
No,
I'm being prejudicial?
they can appeal it
Yeah.
if they believe you rejected a question for being prejudicial, which you didn't do, did you?
I did before, but they're not mad about that.
Yeah, you accepted the question,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So is it alright if I sit here or?
Yeah, of course. Yes, exactly. That'd be a very
I'm Zach. Nice to meet you. I didn't get to meet anybody here before. I'm Zach. Nice to meet you.
I'm Zach too.
Oh, nice to meet you. What's your name?
Matt.
Zach. Nice to meet you.
Rami, do you want to
Nice
sit
to
here?
meet you.
Oh, no.
You sure you?
It's okay. You know, like,
No, because I feel you're representing your side, and you should have maybe a seat at the table if you want. Yeah. Can you just pass? Yeah, sure. Can you pass me the chairs?
Sure.
Oh, do you have a copy of this that you can like also email to us?
Yeah, I can do that.
That'd
Does
be
anyone
really
want
good.
physical?
yeah, I would take one if you don't mind.
No problem.
If you could send it to the judicial board.
Sure. I'll do that right now. Oh, I didn't actually do that. I just remembered.
That's why I've been emailing you at home, just in case.
Ariel, you should probably find a good seat.
I'm actually the one who did
Are you?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I'm Zach, by the way.
Zach.
No problem.
Nice to meet you. Zach Ross. You
Zach.
were not very nice to me on the phone.
I think that might have been a little bit of a misunderstanding. You were under the impression that you were entitled to be the administrator on my Facebook page.
Can we make kind of some kind of a round table? Because I see
This
lots-
isn't a round table discussion.
No, but like just to see who is who.
I'll let people introduce themselves at the beginning.
Huh?
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. Yeah. No, it's fine.
Everyone.
Don't worry. You want some? Yes. Yeah, on the same
You should try to make some place.
Yeah. Do you want me to show this?
Je m'assois au bout là-bas. Tu veux me donner?
Donne-moi tes papiers.
You want to move over one? Just so I can see. I don't want to necessarily intrude on your television. This one? Big.
Yeah, I see it.
It's fine. Can I
This
come?
way
Can I
is
come?
fine.
At the corner?
You can sit over here. We're trying to move over to make room.
Thank you.
Like we like to say, when there is for 10, there is for 11. You know?
Okay, you can come here and you can.
Thank you.
advance yourself.
Actually, so you had the, what did you put?
Sorry? Your paper's over there.
Merci.
Do you have any preference on who presents first? Would you both?
Well, you said you're in a bit of a hurry. So yeah, go first. There's no problem.
Yeah. Well, if you could
I'm
just.
very short.
Okay, but if you could just stick around maybe long enough in case there's
Questions?
any disagreement that you have with what they say
Sure.
specifically. Okay, great. So it's no, are you ready to record?
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right, so it's November 24th and it's about 4:25 p.m. And this is a judicial board hearing of an appeal of the CEO's decision to accept the question that was put forth regarding the boycott of Israel. I'm going to allow the president of the CSU, Ben, an opportunity to present a brief history of the case for us, and then I'll allow Andre to present his case, and then the Concordians United Against BDS to present their case.
Sure, it's good.
Go ahead.
Okay, so we were approached earlier in the year by, I believe it was SDHR, at Council, Solidarity for Palestinian Human Rights, with a suggested position to take up, and the position entails recognizing that there are illegal settlements in Palestinian territories,
Can you speak louder?
Yeah, let me know if I'm not talking loud enough. So the position entails the recognition of illegal settlements in Palestinian territories. So I'm basically mentioning this to give some, I guess, further information about the use of words like occupation and things like that. Anyways, considerable amount of time passed since then, and then we had a council meeting recently, which was called to hear out the petitioners. Because I don't know if people are aware, but last year there were new bylaws that were passed that added to the original bylaws, which outlined how petitions could result in referendum questions, which basically said that the petitioners have to come to council first and explain their petition to council before going forward. And so important to point out is that this is purely a formality, and council has no control over the wording of the petition or the subject matter of the petition. They just simply want to be heard out. So this formality is for the purpose of allowing the petitioners and the CSU to interact with each other. Those are the two parties that are involved in this process. So just to give some, that will become relevant to this discussion later, which is why I'm pointing it out. So yes, no decisions are rendered or were rendered at that time, except for the fact that yes, the CSU heard from the petitioners. And that meeting was held on one of the days that the union recognizes as a day. So basically, there was a petition that went around afterwards, but then council also voted just on its own to essentially ratify officially, although it's not official ratification, but they voted to put the question to ballot that was brought through petition. I'm not entirely sure if the wording is perfectly consistent with what was on the petition. However, the spirit of the motion is largely the same. So that removed the need for the rest of the referendum process to be carried out, which kind of took out a few steps from the process. But ultimately, the petitioners, had they handed in the petition at that time, they would have resulted in the same process. The question would have gone to ballot. So that happened. Right. So once council voted on it, then the CEO carried out his duties to decide on the wording of the question. One of his responsibilities is to ensure that the wording is unbiased, and so he worked with that question as he saw fit within that part of his duties. And then I guess last Thursday, or not last Thursday, but rather at some point he decided to change the wording of the question to better fit, I guess, the description of being unbiased according to him. And the new wording was then communicated to the interested parties last Thursday, if I'm not mistaken. That was one.
Yeah, I reworded it twice actually,
Right,
but
okay.
the final version was on my own accord, poorly distributed immediately, and that was my fault. But people knew what it was by Thursday. By Wednesday, actually, I think it was published on my website.
Okay.
I can look that up.
Okay, by Thursday or Wednesday. And my understanding is that the wording was changed to signify that the motion that people are being, I guess, pulled on, what students are being pulled on, was to suggest a permanent, was not meant to suggest a permanent BDS campaign, but rather to suggest a campaign with the aim of halting pressure on Israel once certain changes have been made within Israeli politics. So that's my understanding of why the wording was changed to add to the question. However, I'm sure that that's the basis of this whole discussion here, is whether or not that is something that can be challenged or upheld. So, does that make sense?
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Ben. And just to clarify, the reason that we are here today is just to examine whether anything that the CEO did is manifestly unreasonable, because that's why this appeal is taking place right now. So we're going to limit the scope of everything that's said to that specifically, so that we don't get into go off topic too far, let's say. Yes, Ben?
Actually, I just wanted to say very quickly, I can't stick around for the entire meeting because I have a town hall I'm supposed to be speaking at, just out front. But if you need clarification on anything, I can help with.
Are there any questions for Ben?
I just have two questions. When you were first referring to the meeting on Friday, you were referring to the first time that they came up and when the motion was not passed, right? When SPHR came and discussed with you guys their petition, and then you guys had a meeting the following Wednesday on a day that wasn't a Jewish holiday, in which it was voted on.
Yeah, the first Friday was, which I was mentioning.
Which was a
earlier,
Jewish holiday.
Yeah, so the chair of the board was notified of the demand for the meeting over the weekend, and Monday was a holiday, and so he did call it on, Monday doesn't count as a workday for us, so within the regulations that outline delays, Friday was the day to have it, essentially. So, but yeah, that's what I was talking about. Okay.
was your second question?
That was it. I didn't have a second question.
Oh, okay. Great. Are there any further questions for Ben? Okay, Andre, would you like to present?
Okay, so I don't have a lot of copies. I didn't anticipate this many people being here, but I just brought like a history of the question. Actually, that one's my little note.
We can,
You guys can all have a look. At the
I
top.
think some of us can share it first.
Yeah, probably. At the top.
Have you
Is the-
emailed a copy of this?
No, but I will.
Okay.
I literally made it like half an hour ago. At the top is the question as it was presented to the CSU and as it was passed on to me, and it's in the minutes, and it's how I received it from Matt Forget, who is the chair of the CSU council. So essentially, I read it over, and I thought there was a lot of terms in there that were biased and that I didn't support, and so I made a first edit. When I made a first edit, I submitted to the people that brought the referendum forward and said, these are the changes that I've made. And if you want, I'll give you a second to read through it, like what the first question was and how it evolved. Everybody gone through it? Okay, so the first one I found to be biased, and I didn't think it would be reasonable at all to put it on the ballot, and I felt it was necessary to make some changes. I made those changes, and like I said, I submitted it to the people that initially brought forward the petition that was signed by all these students, and the people that presented it to council, who ratified it or passed it. We put it on the ballot. When they came up to me, they issued that, okay, I understand why you made a lot of these changes, but they stated that there was one thing that they really thought was important and integral to the question, and that was like providing a timeline for when this BDS campaign would end. And this BDS campaign ending is essentially based on international law, and when the United Nations, which is the largest international governing body in the world, as we all know, deems that Israel as a state complies with international law and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights with regards to this conflict in Palestine, or the conflict in Palestine-Israel territory. So that's why I added that last component. As I understand it, it is this last component that is a point of contention that's brought it here today. And in my view, I still don't see it as biased because the motion that was presented to me needed to have it as a critical part of the question in that it provided a timeline. That's literally all I gotta say.
Okay.
I'm happy to answer questions about what I think bias is, either way, but that's why I came to that conclusion.
Are there any questions for Andre?
Yeah, when you say the people who brought it forward,
SPHR.
it's SPHR,
Mhm.
not the council.
Well, actually, I spoke to the people that presented it as a motion. Anybody, you can bring a motion forward and have it sponsored by council and presented.
So you were saying it was SPHR.
I spoke with people that were part of the Yes Committee that worked on the campaign, yes.
Were they also part of council, or were they just?
One individual was part of council, Randy.
That's it.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Many questions to do.
You said that you found that there was understandable bias in the first question, and that's
Absolutely.
what caused. Do you mind just clarifying the biases that you removed that are no longer present in the last
sure.
question?
Okay, I took a lot of offense to the use of terms like siege, systematic oppression, use of a term like an unprecedented coalition of over 170 civils, like all of these terms are, as I'm sure you guys would agree, very leading to me. Drawing analogs to South African apartheid, while it might be, I'll allow it in a campaign, it's not something that should be appropriately on the question because there's no sort of UN statement that draws that parallel in an official resolution, that I know of anyways. I found that the last sentence in particular, it categorically rejects all kinds of discrimination, including anti-Semitism, and aspires to achieve basic equality for all people in Israel, Palestine, regardless of race or religion. That's also clearly like it's a campaign statement to me more so than a question. Actually, there's not even a question involved in it. Beyond that, I didn't think details pertaining to when the movement started are necessary. That also is, in my opinion, something that is related to a campaign, like launched in 2005 by an unprecedented coalition. That's part of the campaign to me.
Okay, and Andre, thank you for answering that question. I think you've answered it fully.
Sure.
In your opinion, the final version or the final edit that you've made, do you believe that it is a prejudicial question?
No, I don't. Because the latter part of the question, which I agree, again, I stress, I think is the reason why we're here, is a critical component of what they wanted answered. And it provided that timeline that was necessary.
Yeah. Just a quick comment that the last part of the question is not the only. But I think we want to have recognized that the last part of the question is not our only point of contention with the biased nature of the question, and the nature of the question itself.
Okay. Well, I'll give you a chance to present your case in a couple of minutes.
Sure.
But I'd just like to remind you that the reason we're here is to determine whether the CEO was manifestly unreasonable in his decision in determining that this question is not prejudicial.
I'd like to
Well,
know
but
what else made it prejudicial, though, if I could ask.
Is this up
it-
for
Yeah,
debate?
no, I feel like this will be presented in their
Okay.
case, and they'll address it then, and then you can follow up with a question afterwards.
Okay.
Yes.
I have a question. From the first edit up to the kind of like second edit, you kind of like deleted the part the part that basically says which calls for the boycott of all academic and which calls for the boycott of all academic and consumer ties and so on. Why is that? Why did you edit this part?
Honestly, it was very pragmatic. We have 10 questions that were originally supposed to go to ballot, and questions are never supposed to be a paragraph long in a referendum. And I felt that by endorsing the BDS movement and what goes along with it, it is known that that is what it entails. And by including it, it would just extend the question and make it even longer. And people have come up in the past to me all the time. Actually, it's a regular complaint I hear from people at polling stations saying there's just too many questions and they're too long. Like, how do you expect people to reasonably answer these? And so part of my responsibility, I figure, is to make sure it's succinct.
Okay.
Okay. Matt?
At the actual polling station, is there any additional information about this, or is this the only question they're going to see?
This is the question that they'll see on the ballot.
Right.
However, I send out an email to all parties and tell them that they're welcome to send me any preambles that they would like to make available to people coming up. And those are included at the ballot stations.
Yeah,
And it goes to all parties.
do you have a
yes
copy of
side,
the
no
preamble?
side. No, I don't know.
So in other words, if a regular student comes to vote at the polling station,
Mm-hmm.
there's going to be information on exactly what BDS is?
Yes,
Or,
from the yes side and the no side, their
Okay.
perspectives. I don't personally go out and investigate and create a document myself. I welcome both parties to offer their sides to people that are going to vote.
And also, there's a yes, no, is there also a neutral answer? Like, can you?
There's abstain, yeah,
Okay.
every question has an abstention.
Thanks.
Okay, great. Are there any further questions for Andre? No? Okay, in that case, we'll allow the Concordians United Against BDS to present their case.
Okay. Hi. Okay, first thing I just want to address something that Andre just said. At first, the question, he believed that the, sorry. Okay, he believed that, okay, so he was presented with an initial question brought by SPHR, ratified by council, which he found to be a little bit biased. He edited it, first edit, and then edited it again because he felt that the people who brought it forward, SPHR/council, council, felt that it didn't indicate the timeline that they had intended. They didn't clarify what they wanted answered,
Mhm.
right? The problem is with the initial question that was provided by SPHR and ratified by council, it does not indicate anywhere a timeline. So I don't understand where, if that was the intent of the original proposition of the question, why was it not made mentioned in the lengthy paragraph that was the original submission? Second thing, I believe that it is incredibly prejudicial, both the initial question, because for obvious reasons that he mentioned, a lot of terms that are,
Okay, well, let's just deal with what
Okay.
we're
Yeah.
dealing
okay, so
with
we're
now.
dealing with the second edit.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. The second edit is prejudicial. First of all, it calls for the endorsement of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement against Israel. The BDS movement is an international movement that SPHR did not create, and it has certain principles that it must be followed, and those principles are not vague. What this question does is it trivializes it. It doesn't kind of make clear what exactly the BDS movement is, and we've never seen any preamble, like Matt had suggested. We've never seen or heard of any preamble. In fact, what we've seen from the other side's campaign is that their BDS stance actually differs from the BDS movement from which the question calls upon, and what would be enforced by the CSU should this pass. So that clarification is prejudicial. Also because they use terms like Israel's occupation of Palestine. Under international law, the term occupation does not apply with regards to Palestine, first of all. I can go into that with regards to the Hague references, but what's made not clear is what is Palestine. Is it the former British Mandate of Palestine, in which case all of Israel would be considered an occupier? Is it the 1948 borders? Is it the 1967 borders? It's not made clear. All it does is suggest that Israel is an occupier, and that is prejudicial to anybody reading the question, and it's also misleading. Second thing, it says until Israel complies with international law and universal principles of human rights. What this clearly says is that for anybody reading the question, that Israel is a violator of international law and a country, or not even a country, but an entity that doesn't abide by universal principles of human rights. The wording of universal principles of human rights, it implies that there is such a code, which there isn't. What is universal principles of human rights? From where do they derive these biased statements? That's not made clear. Anybody who reads this question will see that, one, the BDS statement it's vague. Two, Israel's occupation of Palestine is prejudicial, calling Israel an occupier and not defining what exactly Palestine is. Three, that Israel is a violator of international law and universal principles of human rights. Second thing I want to bring up quickly is that under Article 305, Section 7 of Chapter 4 of Book 7 of Concordia Student Union states clearly, if you all go to the arguments of the plaintiff's page, under facts of the complaint against Andre Marcel Barrow, CEO.
Unless it's a point of personal privilege, I'm not going to entertain it.
Standing, is it a reference to the economic CSU standing regulations?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where are we exactly?
Article point 1.
Okay.
Point 1, and then I'm going to go to point 2 real quick. Yeah. Under Article 305, Section 7 of Chapter 4 of Book 7 of Concordia Student Union states that not later than 7 days before the polling period, the Chief Electoral Officer shall give public notice setting forth the following particulars as the case may be. A, the designation of each office for which a poll must be held. B, the names of the candidates for each office. C, the wording of each referendum question. And D, the daytime and locations of the polling stations. Section C is underlined because we were actually never notified of any change of the referendum question, which clearly is mandated that he must notify us prior to 7 days before the start of the polling period. And we actually found out inadvertently that it was changed unfavorable to us, just by fluke. Also, one of our committee members, Lauren, called Andre, the CEO, asked him if the question had been changed, which he denied. After which she contacted me. I said, I looked through all of the proof, all the documents, and said it has in fact been changed. After which she had another conversation with him, and he agreed that it had been changed, but he wasn't able to talk about it at that moment and would readdress it at a later point. So that's that. And since we became aware of the modifications by fluke and not by intent, prior to the 7 days minimum, we believe that this question should be completely cancelled and off the table for violation of Article 305, Section 7 of Chapter 4 on Book 5.
Okay.
Are you gonna continue, or is that your presentation?
I thought it was just specifically to the question, but yeah, I mean, we do have other things to say about it. The problem is that like I said before, the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement is an international movement, and even the original question doesn't specify what is really being boycotted, divested, and sanctioned, because the BDS movement actually calls for a complete cultural, academic, and consumer boycott of the entire country, and that is not made clear. So for anybody who is going to vote yes to this, they may not understand, for purposes of, for the very fact that it's not made clear in the question what exactly they're boycotting, basically an entire country and all aspects of it. Yeah.
Do you mind if I'm just going to ask you a question
Sure.
Regarding that, because it says CSU endorsing the BDS movement, but it doesn't specifically state how they would be endorsing the movement or how strictly they would be adhering to it.
Exactly.
So really, I mean, that's at the discretion of the CSU, and I feel that the CSU, if it's an extreme movement, they probably wouldn't adhere to it extremely strongly, because the primary goal of the CSU is to be there to represent the students,
Okay.
not to support strictly BDS movement.
I do think that that has to be made specific in the question that's being presented to the student body, which it's not, and we should not trust and leave it up to one group of students, the CSU, to make that sort of discretionary call, because the BDS movement, like I said, is a very expansive movement. It's calling for the boycott of an entire country, and they can pick and choose what exactly they want to boycott, sanction, and divest from, and they don't have anything, based on the question, no parameters from which to prevent them to go into which lengths, for which there's really no protection of the students who on campus would suffer, and it's
Okay, I see your point.
okay. And then I just want to go on to say that Lauren, I had mentioned Lauren had contacted Andre, called him, he said the question wasn't changed when it was in fact changed, and then proceeded to say that it was changed, and I advised her to contact him through email to get it in writing, which she did, and his response, point 6 of the same paper, in his reply he said, after publishing this in my announcement of polls, I was contacted by members of council who supported and voted for the motion and felt that while understandably the question did need some moderating, felt that I had left out some issues that were important to the question itself and fundamentally needed to be included. What I'd like to say is that since it was made clear that this was actually brought forth by the SPHR, one such member who was on council, we believe it's incredibly inappropriate for the council to be pressuring the CEO to be changing referendum questions. We support the CEO independence from council and other political actors, and we strongly denounce this interference. we believe that an investigation should be started on this immediately. We are also very surprised to hear that the honorarium of the chief electoral officer was decided by council, which means that it's understandable, or we can see why it may have been used as it may have been a factor in his decision to change the question based on the council's pressure.
Well, according, just so you have it straight, the CEO is only responsible to answer to the judicial board. That's why we're here right now, and that's why you're not at a council meeting, because we're the only ones who can reprimand Andre if he was in fact manifestly unreasonable.
Right. My point, yeah, I understand that. My point was that it was made obvious from his email that it was the council members who had pressured him, and we were trying to understand why would he be pressured, why would he succumb to the pressure of council members who would otherwise be uninvolved in this student brought forward motion, and we learned that the honorarium was decided by the council, and we can understand that there is some element of conflict there.
I could ask, so you're saying that he was pressured into changing the first edit into the second, or the initial question into the first?
This first edit into the second.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I mean, moving forward, I mean, can you please keep it just based on the second edit, like what we're currently dealing with right now?
Yeah.
Because what he did before that really isn't relevant to this case.
I'm dealing specifically with, I haven't
Like
addressed.
you're dealing with the second edit.
I'm dealing specifically with the second edit.
Okay.
That was what the edit that was made, that we only found out about on Thursday, and which he denied making, and in the email explaining himself, he mentioned about the second edit that he was pressured by the council to change this.
Since that seems like a direct accusation, I'm just gonna allow Andre a chance to say something or defend
Yeah,
himself against
thanks. The phone call, let's talk about that first. I have no recollection of deliberately denying that I changed the question. I think anybody in this room that has dealt with me up to this point will probably, hopefully, back the fact that I've been incredibly honest and open and facilitating to anybody that's come to me. And the last thing I would ever do in any circumstance would mislead somebody. That's for sure. If I wrote members of council, it's very possible the S was a typo because I was only come forward by one person, which was Rani, in conjunction with other members. Third thing, my mandate is not to contact every single person on campus individually when I make a change to a referendum question, and I just looked through and I made the change on November 16th, which is exactly 7 business days prior to the announcement of the polls. So it came in a timely manner.
Just to be clear, the final edit was made 7 days before the opening of polls?
Exactly.
Okay.
Can I answer?
Sure.
Regardless.
Sorry, actually there was a question.
Yeah.
No, just to point out that the focus of our, of our report is on the second edit. It is also about the change made. It's not just the second edit itself, it's the change that was made.
I totally understand that, but right now, I mean, we can only deal with what's before us, so we can't change history, we can only deal with what's presented.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, we can only deal with like the things that are in our hands right now.
Absolutely. No, I was just pointing out that it's the second edit and it was changed.
Okay.
The referendum question was changed.
I really
So-
do resent the fact that somebody said that I made a lie.
Okay, that's been noted. Yes?
Can I call, maybe there was misunderstanding in our conversation. 'Cause I
Okay,
remember,
please speak directly to
Sorry.
the chair.
Okay, yeah, sorry. I had called you, it was Thursday afternoon on my way home from, I had contacted Andre. It was 5 o'clock on my way home from work because I wasn't at school, I was working all day, and then someone had called me and said we had been approached, that the question had been changed, and I said I have never heard of that, so I called Andre right away and I said, has the question been changed? There may have been some confusion because he didn't make us aware of it on Tuesday. Like, we understand that he's not going to contact every single student at Concordia, but he could have at least made an effort to contact the chair of our committee to let us know, because we were campaigning for 2 days still with the old question, and would have not been
4
made
days.
aware of it unless someone had come up to us and told us. We wouldn't have been made aware of it until we had checked the site.
Where did you make the,
My official elections website.
So it's public on the
public
website.
on the website.
I personally was campaigning on Wednesday.
Could you just state your name?
Sorry, Jeremy.
Jeremy,
Go
and
back.
sorry, what was your name as well?
Lauren.
Lauren and Jeremy.
I just want to ask, like, and I'm not making any accusations, but when I was campaigning, I often got asked about the question and the exact wording. And on Wednesday, I recall it being the first question, and then on Thursday, I still recall it being the first question, and Thursday afternoon, it seeing a change. So I'm curious to know, like, can we see
Yep.
proof? And
Yep, I can show you it right here. This is dated November 16th.
Well,
I'll
so we
direct
know
it to
what,
the
what
judicial board.
what exactly are you showing us?
It's on November 16th at 8:15 p.m. I made the change from do you approve the CSU supporting the boycott, divestment, and sanctioning movement which calls for the boycott of all economic and consumer ties with any institution or company that aids in Israel's occupation of Palestine. 2, do you approve the CSU endorsing boycotting,
So from the first to the second edit.
from the first to the second edit,
Okay.
7 days prior to polls.
And do you have evidence of when you posted that online?
I can take a screenshot right now and send it to you. It says 16th of November at 8:15 p.m. 2015.
Okay, so you're.
Do you wanna see it?
See what's
Yeah.
on your page?
My computer is old.
Here,
and
I'll
broken.
come over. It's just hard to
But-
understand
yeah,
exactly what you're
yeah.
showing us.
So on my website, anybody actually can go and see when I have revised any information. If you go to the bottom here, and it says CSU elections revisions, 16th of November at 8:15. You click it, it'll go to the exact changes that have been made. They highlight them in color for you, and you can see the changes right there.
may I see it?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so just for the record, it shows all the changes that were made to your website and when those changes were made, and it does appear that the change was made.
In the only public way of connecting with people I have.
So there is also another document on the site that is the announcement of polls.
Right, which hasn't been changed.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that,
And that's still hanging up around this.
okay, yeah, exactly, that as well.
Okay,
So students could also not be aware.
so there's the announcement of polls where.
There's 2 contradicting questions. There's the announcement of polls, which has the first edit, and then the referendum, well, I don't know exactly the title of the page, referendum information, where it lists all the questions, is the second edit.
And if you look at the announcement of polls at the top, it says explicitly that they're subject to change. Because over the past 2 years, typically I've been given referendum questions at the last minute,
Okay.
and I've needed time to make adjustments. And so that's why I explicitly point out that, and I point to my website.
Great.
Yes, Randy?
I can show you that exact disclaimer too, if you like.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that disclaimer that he was talking about.
Oh, okay, thank you. Yes?
I just wanted to ask, like, it says, I believe it says the words notifying. Is posting to a website, I mean, he has
It
ways.
depends on the definition of what
I just
public
wanna-
notice is. Public notice, for instance, for this meeting, is just me sending out an email on a public email list stating that there's going to be a meeting.
Okay.
It might be slightly different, but that's something the judicial board will look into when we go into deliberations.
Okay, just a thought that there are Facebook pages, there's emails, he has the he was able to communicate with the yes and the no side. And I personally believe that the assumption that we should be refreshing the page at any given moment to see a change isn't acceptable.
Well, over the past 7 days, Andre, have you posted on any Facebook website or otherwise the old question?
No,
Have you posted the new question?
I don't think so. I've posted
So you
references to
haven't
my
posted,
website.
and by your website, you mean the one that
The
you've
official
made,
CSU elections website.
the one that you've made
Yeah.
changes to?
CSU.elections.qc,
The one-
or
the one-
elections.csu.qc.
Yeah, the one that shows the second edit.
Exactly.
Okay.
So,
Would you like to continue?
well, that being said, I think it's very clear that there was the last change made to a public, made to the public or to those interested parties was the first edit. The second edit may have been made on the CSU official page, but like Jeremy said, it's a little bit daunting the task to expect everybody to be refreshing the page, especially when we're in constant communication with the CEO, which we have been for numerous issues, that we would not have been notified of such a such a drastic change in the question that we've been campaigning for.
I think there was just a question from.
In what manner were you guys notified of the first edit? Like, did he,
It
was
was on the
he-
announcement poll.
We weren't notified of the first.
And did you file any kind of a grievance against Andre at that time because you weren't notified of the first edit?
No.
Oh, no, I did the first.
We started our campaign solely based on the first edit. We just
We never saw the
Okay.
prior.
we knew,
Okay.
like, I had
Right.
seen that the first, the long paragraph,
It was
the
never
initial
published.
question, that was what was on the petition, I believe, that
The SPHR
they were getting the signatures to get the question to ballot. So we started our campaign based on the first edit. We assumed that this was just a shortened version of this because you're not, like Andre said, you're not gonna have a paragraph on a
Okay.
And
referendum question.
to go on that note, while one thing is that we were still not notified of this change within the 7 days, also what we accepted to be okay, the first edit, it changed. We understand that the CEO reserves the right to reformat the question should said question be prejudicial to the outcome of the referendum. And it's with certainty that we say that the edit made the question even more prejudicial to the outcome of the referendum for the previous mentioned reasons. So I believe that being said, I believe that he did not follow his mandate.
May I make a point as well?
Yes.
Yeah, that also the question, like Zach had mentioned, that the question itself is vague as to what exactly endorsing the boycott, divestments, and sanctions means. How we should understand the word endorsing, whether we're taking the official BDS movement's demands, or are they proposing a diluted version of it to be adopted by the CSU? None of that is clear, and we think that the vagueness of the question is also prejudicial.
Right.
Yeah.
Just want to bring up that point that I find very important. Andre said that the reason for the change, the second edit, was to make it not any less biased, because he believed the first edit was unbiased, but because the council members who contacted him thought that it was important that there be a timeline when this boycott would end. And like I mentioned before, if that was their intention, that would have been stipulated in their initial question that was submitted, but it wasn't. So, and also it wasn't submitted by the council members, it was submitted by SPHR.
But just out of curiosity, isn't it better for your case that it's possible for the boycott to end rather than just being an open-ended boycott?
No, because what is the timeline? Israel's, again, until Israel complies with international law and universal principles of human rights, under, like, whose discretion is that? It's not made clear.
Andre seemed to understand it was at the discretion of the United Nations.
Okay.
Yeah, if I can interject?
Sure.
Okay. No, the international law and universal principles of human rights is not a monolithic, a document, and is in the United Nations itself is interpreted by various agents and various members in widely different ways. So the question proposed seems to imply that there is some sort of, internationally recognized monolithic document regarding international law and universal principles of human rights, when no such solid entity exists and is left to the discretion of all kinds of members of the United Nations to interpret themselves.
So I'm going to let Andre explain why he decided to state the international law and universal principles of human
It's
rights.
based on different resolutions from the United Nations Security Council in general. So I can point to specific ones if you want.
That, of course, I'm sorry, but of course, Israel being a member of the UN.
Resolution 242, Resolution 1544.
And what did those resolutions state?
I don't remember.
Oh, those
I'll
are-
email them to you.
Those are resolutions from the United Nations Security Council?
might be easier if I just.
Which one is it?
You can search it. 44.
244?
Yeah, and if you actually go into their history, there's a large, long, storied history.
Well, I have one here, it's UN Resolution 242,
Yeah.
which is voted on November 22nd, 1967, which required Israel to leave all occupied territories. So this is one UN resolution that they have violated.
But does it specifically state international law and universal principles of human rights?
Well, this is from the UN resolutions, right? So
I mean, we're not
Well,
just
it
talking
is-
about UN resolutions in general. I'm just wondering exactly where
Can I have
this
one here?
statement comes from.
The Security Council, this is from Wikipedia, so it's not the most reliable thing in the world.
It's not.
We've heard evidence from lesser sources in the past.
I don't.
It's got a reference,
Doesn't
I
really
can find it,
reassure
but essentially what it says, the Security Council reiterated that Israel is the occupying power to abide by its legal obligations under the Fourth Geneva Convention while it was called upon to address its security needs according to international law.
That
In the interim, I will look up a better citation.
that
Yes.
And that still doesn't.
as an interpretation of that, that makes clear that it is Israel's responsibility to follow those laws, but that states that in the same context as saying that it's the role of the United States government to look after the rights of its citizens. That's not citing a violation or.
It's not calling out
The other-
Israel as a carved in stone violator of international law, and also just to let you know, because I've done my research, there is no such UN resolution that stipulates a universal principles of human rights. Such a thing does not exist. Universal principles of human rights. It was fabricated for the purposes of this question.
Neither that or the occupation of Palestine,
Yeah.
because Palestine is not recognized as a member of the United Nations, and right now, I mean, most the documents pertaining to Palestine either refer to Palestinian territories, such as the West Bank or Gaza, but do not refer to occupation of Palestine. And a reader of this question can interpret Palestine in any way they wish, including, you mentioned it before, do we refer to the 48, agreement, the Green Line, or 67 borders? It's very possible for a reader to interpret Palestine as being British Mandate Palestine, whereas where that includes Jordan and other areas that are no longer part of Israel proper.
I found a better resource. Like me to read.
Okay, does it
From the
state a
United States.
definition for the international and universal principles of human rights? Because I'm just interested in if it's until Israel complies with this set of human rights. I mean, if this actual set of human rights doesn't even exist, then it seems like that could be a problem.
Yes.
Can I ask a question? Where did
No, not yet.
I didn't come up with that, again. That was
Just
rough.
ask where it came from.
Didn't you write the question?
Of course,
No.
I have the question.
I didn't.
No, not you. Sorry. This
Ask them
format.
to look at you when they spoke.
This formality. Yeah, this formality is throwing me off. Sorry.
And Andre, you mentioned that the
From the UN FPA.
the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
Yeah. It's human rights principles.
I have this one too. Yeah, there are a few.
And then the Security Council is 1544 from the U.S. State Department, reaffirms its previous resolutions 242, 338, 446, 1322, 1397, 1402, 1403, 1405, 1435,
No, it's
and
not called
1515,
international law.
No.
reiterating the obligation of
Yeah.
Israel, the occupying power, to abide
Okay, let's
scrupulously.
have some decorum and listen to what Andre's saying while he's speaking.
Okay, so this is the actual resolution directly, and this is from the U.S. State Department, so it's a credible resource. Reaffirming its previous resolutions 242, 338, 446. Oh my God, are you kidding me?
Let's wait till it's there.
Will it? Okay.
So, sorry, which,
This is from the U.S. State Department. I can send you the link.
okay.
I'll say it. The Security Council reaffirming its previous resolutions 242, 338, 446, 1322, 1397, whatever. Reiterating the obligation of Israel, the occupying power, to abide scrupulously by its legal obligations and responsibilities under the Fourth Geneva Convention relative to the protection of civilian persons in the time of war. Calling on Israel to address its security needs within the boundaries of international law, expressing its grave concern at the continued deterioration of the situation on the ground in the territory occupied by Israel since 1967, condemning the killing of Palestinian civilians that took place in the Rafah area, gravely concerned by the recent demolition of homes committed by Israel, the occupying power, in the Rafah refugee camp, recalling the obligations of the Palestinian Authority and the government of Israel under the roadmap, condemning all acts of violence, terror, and destruction, reaffirming its support for the roadmap, endorsing its resolution 1515 from 2003, calls on Israel to respect its obligations under international humanitarian law and insists in particular on its obligation not to undertake demolition of homes contrary to that law, expresses grave concern regarding the humanitarian situation of Palestinians made homeless in the Rafah area and calls for the provision of emergency assistance to them, calls for the cessation of violence and for respect of and adherence to legal obligations, including those under international humanitarian law, calls on both parties to immediately implement their obligations under the roadmap, decides to remain seized of the matter. I'll send you the link.
Right, thank you.
Yeah, just that I just want to re-stress that the boycott, divestment, sanctions has their own demands and own terms that I think it's worth acknowledging, and that if we're asking students whether or not the CSU should endorse this movement, we need to recognize that they have their own agenda and they have their own demands vis-a-vis Israel, which are
Okay, Andrew, do you have any knowledge of what exactly is in the preamble? Because we might want to take a look at it.
I've requested both parties to send it to me.
Could I just
Yeah.
I just want to, I think, to go on my aunt's point, I think it's really, really important to stress that, yes, the BDS movement, it is its own separate organization. It's an international organization that has its own demands, and that to put in until Israel complies with international and universal principles of human rights, for which we have not yet seen such document that mentions these tenets, these alleged tenets. It's very important to note that when you're endorsing a movement like the BDS, which does not recognize Israel's right to exist, how can you then say that it will continue until Israel, as an existing country, complies with international law and universal principles of human rights, when the BDS movement only ends when there's one state, a secular democratic Palestine, which is what they call for.
Before
You just like Jules was mentioning, just it says in the first one, the petition they signed about trees.
you have a question?
No, basically, I just wanted to, it's okay, I guess I can bring it into the deliberation, I suppose. I can hold it.
Yeah, you should present it.
That's fine.
Yes, Rami.
I'd just like to start by mentioning that there are like kind of two different ways you can go with the BDS. One of them is a targeted boycott, divestment, sanction that you want to do. Therefore, you want to target, let's just say, one institution in particular, because this is what some people think is the most effective. For example, there are some groups in the Middle East that call for the direct boycott of SodaStream, which was able to successfully relocate the SodaStream factory from the West Bank to back inside Israel. So, and then there is also like the general boycott, which is a little different than, well, majorly different than the targeted boycott, right? So I just want to say that there are a difference, and as if this referendum question passes, it will give the council the support to pass in different. I mean, it will let council kind of guide where this kind of, which kind of BDS we would opt for. Concerning the part of the question that says that the Israel's occupation of Palestine, these words come directly from the positions book of the CSU. In July or August, probably August, CSU has passed a position or a motion that condemns Israel against its illegal occupation of Palestine, its illegal settlements. So whether the student body, I mean, it's a resolution, it's a motion that the CSU recognizes, and this is where the legitimacy of the occupation of Palestine comes from, because the Judicial Board takes into consideration the bylaws and standing regulations of the CSU, and the bylaws and standing regulations of the CSU take into account the illegal occupation of Palestine.
Can you send us that document, please?
Like at this moment? Okay, I could.
Whenever you can.
Okay, I'll do
Yeah.
it. So.
I wanted to hear from you first.
Yes, my name is Ariel.
Ariel?
These are kinds of arguments that are being used in misleading people wanting to have information, such as with the BDS movement. A quick look at the BDS movement website clearly shows that the goal of the BDS movement is to boycott the entire country, not just companies in the settlements, for example. And this is the kind of things that we can hear downstairs at the table that are being widely said. You are going, if you do this, you are going to encourage that there will be no more companies in settlements. In fact, this is misleading the people who want to vote, because in the clear facts, it is not the same thing that you can see on the BDS movement's website, which we can somehow call even false representation.
All right. Yeah, I just want to Rami's point that if there is such a distinction in ways to implement the BDS movement, which I think our side denies really exists, why is it not in the question that this is the targeted type of BDS versus the general type of BDS? Why is it not specified in the question where that would be such a central thing? Because the distinction between the two kinds is huge. Not that we agree that there is such a distinction within the BDS movement.
Do I have a direct response?
All right.
Basically, once let's just say in the case that this referendum question passes, we want council to guide where this boycott is going to go. I mean, even inside the team, there are some people who are calling more for a targeted or general boycott, but we believe that it's CSU's the council's mandate to decide, because I mean, just look at how all the procedures for the other referendum question have been processed. For example, just I think last year or 2 years ago, there was the Food Coalition referendum question, which allowed them to pass in 5 motions, right, 5 resolutions, and we want council to manage where this referendum, what kind of boycott we want to go through, because the last thing we want to do is hurt the union, right? So the CSU will be able to better guide where we want to go with this BDS.
Right. Well, it definitely doesn't specifically mean that council has to look at the BDS website and do everything that's stated on that. But
that's why we made this clear. Like we want to keep it as vague as possible, so that the CSU will be able to.
Because there still is going to be debate when it's brought to the CSU about exactly how to.
But we create a small distance between us and the BDS movement that exists at this moment, because I mean, just through our campaign, we didn't use any resources from the BDS movement, although they're given to us. We decided to go with something more independent, just like UCLA that passed the BDS resolution. I think it was like 5-6 days ago. Every school is going through a different boycott, and the one that is more appropriate to the school. For example, whatever. I mean, Concordia has different ties to different universities compared to UCLA, right? So we want something that is more customized to Concordia, something that is also fair for both parties.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm just wondering, and in all respect, obviously, that isn't this a little bit disingenuous to campaign on a kind of a soft BDS and then say that we will let council decide which one to implement and not include it in the question, allowing students to really know what they're being voting on and how this endorsement could manifest itself.
Okay, I'm going to let Andre and Lauren speak on this issue specifically, and then kind of suppress the debate on exactly this part of it, because I think we've heard all the arguments basically.
Very briefly, there's a really strong precedence of the CSU asking for generalized endorsement on things and being able to use that essentially as a way of knowing how the students feel about an issue and addressing it from there. Inevitably, there's so many more complexities that can't be addressed in just a simple, succinct referendum question that the democratically elected council members who were elected for that purpose to discuss and decide how best to serve students are there to make those decisions. And precedents would include any of the essential polls from last year, like the CFC's polls, do you support this? Or, I mean, I could look up dozens if you really want me to.
Like the food code.
Exactly. There's huge precedents.
Yes, Laura?
Just something, if you're saying that you're not going to follow the BDS actual movement, you're going to kind of personalize it to suit Concordia, why would you refer to it then as the BDS movement? Because someone then is going to, like, personally, when this was called, I went and I read the entire BDS website to find out exactly what this calls for. So why can't the question simply be, do you support the CSU endorsing just a simple boycott of Israel, and then go into how you're going to tailor to it, not refer to an organization that say you're not going with everything they say, but make reference to them.
Alright, I think it's getting a bit too far off topic. If you want, you can go and have a coffee together afterwards and talk about it. But I don't think it's really necessary for the judicial board to hear that anymore. So if there's anything else specifically related to whether this question is, or whether what Andre did is manifestly unreasonable by suggesting the second edit, then please present your argument right now. And Andre, you stated that you have already printed off the second edit.
I printed the ballots. Yeah, the ballots have to go into order,
Right.
like well in advance
And-
of the actual print, right?
Right.
If I can't go into them and ask them to print them off.
Yeah.
However, in this circumstance, I have already prepared an alternative ballot with an alternative question. And if the judicial board deems it completely necessary, I can try and organize some way of printing off the second alternative ballot.
Okay.
But,
But we'd have to do it shortly, yeah.
I mean, I'd need a 24-hour print shop and I'd have to stay up all night. Which is great.
Great.
I'm doing that already on Thursday.
And do you have a copy of the alternate
I
question?
do, yeah. I actually brought my really ugly alternative ballots, which I really stress are really
Yes.
ugly.
Can we know what is the
Alternative
the alternative
Of course.
question?
Yeah, just give me
Present
one
it.
moment.
Okay.
Yeah, it's somewhere around here. So sorry, guys.
Maybe I took
It's
it.
just,
No, here it is.
so we have to make a
Do you
decision about
approve
whether we
of the, can I read it?
Yeah.
Do you approve the CSU endorsing the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement against Israel? That is the secondary question that I have prepared. And there was no
We're
insight.
gonna hear the same
Yeah.
arguments
Yeah.
about this, I feel.
Yes, I
Some
just
people
wanted to address something that I didn't before. I understand that the BDS movement is something that the intent is to affect the conflict in some positive way, right? Do we all agree that that's the intent of it? It's not to implicate students on campus who suffer at the hands of adopting such a movement. But I want to stress that the BDS movement in its entirety would do just that on our campus, because as it states clearly on the website, it's a cultural, academic, and consumer boycott completely of Israel. And to assume that the discretion is up to the CSU to determine what should be boycotted and what should not be boycotted would leave the students on campus who affiliate with Israel or with Jewish student clubs very vulnerable. It would be, if it was endorsed to the fullest, which it's not made clear in the question, those clubs would be subject to close down because they actually support Israel, and the BDS movement specifically calls for the abolishment of any institution, organization, or individual
we
that
can't
supports.
speculate about what could potentially
But
happen.
what we can
I'd
say
also
We
like
do
to-
understand the point that you're making.
well,
Can
what
I-
we can say is that the BDS movement, if it's not otherwise specified, would imply that all of the students on campus would potentially suffer from this endorsement, should the CSU decide to do so.
I just wanted to point out that the point here is to discuss whether or not I am unreasonable. It's not a discussion of whether or not the CSU's decision to put this to ballot was unreasonable. A context where you could discuss that, I don't know how to do it, because it doesn't have anything to do with elections, but maybe you can figure it out. But I don't know, it's not part of me, it's
Exactly,
not
and
part of why we're
It's-
here.
Your job is to make the
Basically-
question neutral.
No,
And
but
that's
we.
the only thing we're discussing right now.
Yeah, the judicial board also assumes that students are educated enough to look into things at least a little bit before they cast a vote, or they can always abstain, as was noted earlier. Yes?
You, to the members of the judicial board, we had a conversation on the phone, Andre, and in this conversation he said that yes, that was the question that would be told, but I also told him, and Andre told me on the phone that it could be possible to bring other questions if these questions were clearly stated, which is the case. Now, I'm not willing to go into debate regarding positions. We are in a university. University is a place for debate. We can do this outside. We can even organize this kind of debate. I believe even it could be positive for this. It could have been even better to have this kind of debate before this question was brought on the campus. But I think that things have to be done fair. I want to share just the way I think about it. I think things should be done fair. We're in democratic university. People can bring any kind of question they want. It's their right. But the things have to be played by the rules. Playing by the rules includes not to misleading students in the way we present, in maybe when the CSU will decide to take this or not, but we're not even sure. And that is, I think, an ethical problem that must be felt by you when you will think about it, and you will have options about it.
Okay, I'm just going to allow 3 more speakers. The 3 people who have their hands up now, because I think we're moving in circles. You, then Andre, and then you.
I just want to say that the point of a referendum question is not to micromanage inside the CSU council or executive's duties, right? So that's why
Okay, this has nothing to do with the judicial board.
I'm just answering to what he was saying.
Yeah, but we don't need to hear that.
I was going to ask to be excused.
Yeah,
I've
okay.
had a meeting going on for a week.
You
like
can
for
be
5 o'clock.
excused. Actually, just give him the respect of 2 minutes
Okay.
until he finishes.
Yeah, I'll be brief.
No problem.
I just want to say that like you mentioned, students can take it upon themselves to do the research necessary to answer the question, and it's not. It would, in my opinion, it would be a failure to take it upon ourselves, whoever ourselves are that's making the question, to provide context that thus biases the question and turns it into a leading question. We presented our arguments already as to what exact elements of the question are biased, and I really think we can agree, we probably can't, but I really believe that any neutral person that reads this question will understand Israel to be the aggressor and thus it's leading, and therefore I urge you to do your best to remove the bias.
Right, and therefore the alternate question that Andre had suggested, which was, should the Concordia Student Union support the BDS movement, you would consider that less biased?
But equally vague.
Yes, less biased and equally detrimental.
Less biased, but you have to also take in consideration that damage has been already done for 2 weeks. And my conviction is that in the future, it could be possible that anyone will want to bring again this kind of question, but this has to be done fair from the beginning to the end of the campaign, not changed in the middle to become more fair, because the damage has already been done. And that is something to take in consideration.
Thank you. Max?
What about the first edit?
Let's see if we have any questions for Andre, because I know that he wants to head out.
Sure.
And are there any questions for Andre before he leaves? No? Okay, thank you very much for coming, Andre.
Okay, thank you everybody. I really support everybody's right.
Thank you everyone.
But for everyone else,
I
aside
really
from
hope
Andre,
that
could
came across.
you
Thank
just sit down while
I have to go.
Okay, I'd
I'll
also
give you
just
my
to
name.
get everyone's full name written down who said something, just so we can note it in our minutes. So if you can just, yes, Matt.
Yeah, would you guys agree that the first edit addresses the issue of vagueness and bias better than the second and the alternative?
But it is,
By that you mean less vague? Is it less
Yeah, exactly.
it may be less vague, but it is even more leading.
The first edit?
First side. Significantly more leading.
What do you mean?
Just write down your full name, please.
You want student ID? Or?
No.
It's not final exam.
So, Matt, your question was?
Yeah, I was just asking what the first edit said.
Looking
Or-
at something?
Again, they both mention an occupation of Palestine that is very vague. What is
Where do I send you
the first?
Sorry,
And-
let him speak.
Yeah, to go on that note, Rami said that it was based on a CSU's statement that was issued this summer and considered Israel an occupier. And I just want to implore that when calling an entire country such a term, an occupier, we should probably refer to international law and not to the student government at a university.
Right.
And under international law, Israel is not deemed an occupier.
Yeah. Right, no, nothing more about whether
it's
Israel's
off-
an
it's
option.
off
No, but
the
that's
record.
because
We-
that's
we-
why the question.
I know, we
it's-
totally
but-
understand your point, we've heard
No,
it
just because
many
he asked
times.
between the first and second edit, and they both say the same thing with regards to that. So yeah, they're both.
Out of the question context, I mean, off the record, I hope one day they'll be able to have a real debate on the campus where everyone can be invited, even if they come from any place inside of Israel as well.
We want to thank the Judicial Board for hearing us out. And,
Yeah, definitely, thank
Thank
you
you.
all for coming.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thanks
and,
for the opportunity.
since the polling starts tomorrow, we're going to have to issue a preliminary decision this evening, and we'll have a full written decision within the next
Will it-
5 business days.
Will it be posted or will you notify?
Tonight's decision I can notify you guys if you want.
That would
Could
be
you
awesome.
please,
I can send you a text if one of you wants
Yeah,
to put that in front of me.
Would it be possible to basically put it onto the CSU Facebook page? To
As
send
soon
it
as
to
my
Ben
as soon as
something?
our full document is written, I'll post it. If I can post Word documents onto that or PDF documents, I'll post it there. But
Okay.
normally what I do is I send it to the public list and to the student media.
think
So
that's-
you should receive it on the public list and
and you'll text.
yeah,
I think
exactly.
that's sufficient.
Can I put my email to make sure I have a copy?
Sure.
So I emailed our thing to the judicial, we email you guys the report.
Just one time.
Yeah, please email us
Yeah.
whenever you gave us the
Take John.
It's judicial board.
I don't know if you just want to text me on the way to work, just so I can
Uh,
I'll read out what you say, just so we know
What
how you
time
feel.
should we know?
Okay, yeah. Well, I'm going to the vet, so you can
Oh.
just call me. Yeah.
Oh, I thought you were going to work.
No, I have to go get my dog's cast.
Oh, I hope you're all okay.
What's the email for JV to send you?
I can give you my personal email if you want. Okay, thank you all for coming.
Thank
Thanks
you,
a lot.
thank you.
Thank you guys very much.
This personal.
That's good choice.
Sorry?
Jesus Christ.
And you put some writing on it so we can retrieve it?
This is not right.
That's not mine. I think that was
This
Jonathan,
is
right?
my email with
Oh, no, I have one.
CSU,
Okay.
You wanna keep that writing?
Okay, so I'll send you our document.
Yeah,
Okay,
exactly,
perfect.
because then I'll definitely.
That was
receive
mine or
it.
that was yours? Yeah, that was mine.
Okay, and
Zach, I gave you my email right here.
great, and these are the 2 numbers that I'm gonna text.
And
And
26.
that's him.
Yeah. So, okay, yeah,
Yeah,
And-
if,
well,
or
I'm
if you're
gonna-
gonna email me, then that's fine.
yeah, okay.
Okay.
But yeah, I'll definitely let you know the preliminary decision tonight. I'm gonna send it out on the public list, just to let people know what we decide. I don't know.
I'm just wondering.
Whenever we decide, we're gonna take our time to make sure we get it right.
What is the preliminary?
Yeah, what would be the
The
difference?
preliminary
between-
decision
I don't mean your
will
decision.
state what's gonna happen tomorrow, because polls open
Okay.
tomorrow. So we either have to allow polling to go forward and the votes either not to be counted.
Sure.
And then at the end of polling period, they'd be sealed until we make a full decision. Or we could ask for an alternate question to be asked. I mean, it's really at the discretion of the judicial board what we do.
Can I put my phone on your floor?
Okay, thank you very much to you, TV.
Thank you.
What building was that? Just so I know. Like,
CUTV.
CUTV.
Oh, okay.
Concordia University.
Wait, so are we gonna be like famous now?
On CBC.
Famous.
Yo, we'll get
So
like
famous.
like 50 views on YouTube.
It's gonna happen. Sorry.
Oh, say no.
So
Oh, that's
like,
your.
will this affect the polling tomorrow at all, or?
It could.
It could?
Yeah, definitely.
So it could
And
be
that-
very
that's
last
why we're issuing a decision tonight, so that people know what's happening at polling tomorrow. Like, I have to tell Andre whether this poll is going to be put on the ballot or not.
Okay.
Or whether we want an alternate question on it, or, because he came up
So
with.
the options are to be taken out completely, or the alternate happen, or?
Or the one, yeah, as it
So
is.
there's 3 options.
Yeah. Okay, exactly.